Welcome back to another episode of the ByteTalk podcast. We have with us today Gary Carrier from Brazil right now. We'll get into why you're down there and everything, but we're so excited to have you here with us, Gary.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to sharing more about what's going on here in Brazil and a little bit about how I ended up down here.
Yeah, Gary, we're so excited to talk to you. I'm actually curious, where's home for you nowadays? Is it Brazil or is it the US? Where are you based?
Oh man, that's a good question. So I've been a bit of a nomad for the last decade, I would say. I put some firm roots down in the Bay Area in Oakland, California for about 8 years. I'm originally from Seattle, Washington, and now I'm spending my time between Rio de Janeiro and Las Vegas.
That's awesome. And how come a guy that went to Berkeley can decide to throw everything and live in the largest favela in Brazil? Because I know that you lived in the Rocinha favela for a while. So how that happened in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to note, Rocinha is a favela in Brazil. And for those who don't know what a favela is, it's an informal urban settlement. Sometimes the term slum is used. It's the biggest in all of Latin America. It's roughly 180 to 200,000 people. There's not an exact census on it, but it's one of over 2,000 favelas just in Rio de Janeiro alone. To tell you a little bit about how I ended up there, I have to start a little bit farther back and tell you that growing up, I grew up part of my life in between a Native American Indian reservation and a community of largely Hispanic families, mostly Mexican immigrants who had come to work in the agricultural sector in Washington State. So I was always kind of within communities or cultures that were not of my own. I'm not indigenous myself. I'm not Hispanic myself, but I was always around those cultures. And I always was very much drawn to the sense of community and the sense of family that exists in those cultures. From a very early age, I wanted to learn Spanish based out of my desire to express my gratitude for the delicious food I was being fed, for the humility I was being shown,
Awesome.
all of the things that exist a lot in Hispanic culture. So I was always very much drawn to that. And so I think that planted probably the first seed in my head. And then as I grew older, I did a lot of construction growing up, so I was always around Spanish speakers. And then coming of age, sort of in the 2008, 2009 height of the housing crisis that ended up reverberating across the world, it jaded me. So I had to take a step back and look at what I really wanted for my life, because the conventional recipe of do one thing your entire life and then retire and enjoy the last couple of decades, I saw for a lot of people that didn't work out for them. So I was very hesitant to follow that sort of conventional path. And at the same time, Latin America was calling me. I felt that very much. So in the wake of the crisis, in the midst of seeing a lot of my peers, going back to live with mom and dad or going right into graduate school, not much opportunity in the job market, I bought a one-way ticket to Mexico and ended up in a city called Guadalajara and worked as an English professor. I got a job right away. Being an American English speaker, native language was not too difficult. So I stayed there for about a year teaching. I got my own apartment and developed a group of friends and stuff. But while I was there, I always felt the need and the sense to give back in some way. And a lot of that was usually used through my construction background. So I worked with Habitat for Humanity. I worked for the Fuller Center for Housing. And then as I made my way through Central America, I was always involved in kind of spontaneous projects, social projects, building houses for people really low income, doing reconstruction on schools and such. And I ended up down in Colombia, in Bogota, and this was by way of a small NGO, I think, that I had found on the internet, and they were needing volunteers to do reconstruction on a school in a community called Soacha, which is similar to a favela. And the director of that school there had a house and said, "Look, Gary, you speak English, you speak Spanish. I would really enjoy, and it would be a big help to the organization if you could stay and kind of be our coordinator between those volunteers that are coming in and the people that we have here on the ground, be a liaison. And for that, I'll give you a place to stay, I'll help you out with food, et cetera, et cetera. So I kind of, I was young, I was early 20s, and I was really enjoying learning, getting my Spanish better and exploring new environments and all of the benefits I think that come from travel, which is essentially being vulnerable, right? Travel is vulnerability. Mm. You're in a new environment, you don't speak the language or you don't know the culture very well, and you have to be vulnerable. You have to depend on other people, and that creates empathy. It begets empathy, right? And so when you're back in your homeland and you see somebody who's a little bit lost, you have more empathy for that person, and you want to help because you've been in that position before. So, and that empathy begets peace. So travel, empathy, peace, I love that, and so remember at that time, 2010, 2011, there wasn't WhatsApp and Instagram and Facebook was still fairly new, and I was just always on the internet looking for new opportunities, looking for ways to help, but at the same time ways to sustain myself. I didn't have pockets that were, so deep that I could do this forever. So teaching English was always a way that I could sustain myself, or working as a volunteer coordinator in the case of Colombia. And I saw an opportunity on the internet for a small organization that existed inside the favela in Brazil and needed an English professor. So I wrote an email and I said, hey, I'm an English professor. I'm really interested in learning more about Brazil. I'm really interested in learning Portuguese. And it rode within the similar vein of every time I go to a new environment, I like to live with a family, right? The family is kind of where you get your language better and where you learn more about the culture. And it's a sense of comfort as well. It's security. And so this organization particularly said, if you come and be our English professor, we will provide you with a family to live with. And I said, boom, that's it. Okay, I'm going to buy my plane ticket. I'll be there, next month. And so I remember arriving here. It was August, and it was raining. It was raining. And you go from Bogota, which is really higher elevation than Denver, all the way to sea level in a tropical environment. And then all of a sudden in a favela. A very dense, informal community, open sewers. And so the first week I got there, I remember going up the hill and it was raining. It was pouring down rain. The taxi said, okay, here we are. Get out, unload the bags. And all of a sudden we're walking up a flight of what seemed like endless steps in the pouring down rain through all of these shacks and makeshift housing. And we got to the family's house and I opened up and I don't know, maybe 12 or 20 hours later, I got more sick than I'd ever been in my life, and I was sick there for about 5 days. But I'll say, I got my antibodies, so I haven't been sick like that. But that's more or less how I ended up down there.
Wow,
that's such a fascinating story and pretty counterculture, I would say. Even you mentioned you had identified I was going this one way back in 2000, pre-2008, and then you kind of had a moment where you rethought what am I living for? What are my goals, and what do I want to have accomplished in 30 years? And I think that there's an overwhelming current of do that through money and things and roles or responsibilities or founding companies or whatever. But you took a very different route. What has been the downsides of that, I guess? It sounds really appealing. It sounds scary. It sounds really appealing. But what is have you felt tension, even people not understanding why you're down there, or your friends or family?
Definitely. And that's part of the downside is people will, they look at you and they say, you're crazy. What are you doing? Come back, or if you want to help people, there's plenty of people that need help here. Why don't you come back, and help people here? But the truth is that just because you have a division of border doesn't mean that the life of a human being has a different value in any other place, right? And I think it's super important to follow, what's calling you, because most of the time, what's really calling you, where you're really supposed to be, in my case down here right now, this was not the first door that I opened, right? This was door 9, 10, 11. But in order to figure out door 9, 10, or 11, I had to open up the first door, right? Which goes back to the thing of vulnerability. right? You don't know what's out there. You just know that something's calling you. And so you've got to have faith in yourself, and also that, there's a story out there for you that needs to be realized. I always make this reference that there's a connection between the head and the heart, right? You have to allow the heart to be kind of the North Star, right? That's the thing that guides. You have to have the head to be able to navigate the specific reality. Right, you have to have the head to, okay, how am I going to make money? How am I going to do this? Blah blah blah. But allowing this to be your North Star, because this is the thing that will never lie to you, right? Even with the best intentions, people sometimes don't. It's not that they don't have their best interests for you. They don't know. Everybody's story is different, and so you have to allow this to lead you, and then do so. Navigating that pathway with intelligence, right?
Yeah, it's crazy how, when I look at your path and I try to look at my path, I feel like we moved into opposite directions, and yet we met in the middle. For me, growing up in Brazil, living in Rio for 6 years, and I didn't come from a super low income family, inside of favelas, but a middle class, low middle class. And for me, it was always a fight to get into comfort, almost seeking comfort and trying to escape that reality. Whereas you maybe grew up in a place that you had a little bit more comfort, but you were seeking this comfort. You were seeking that calling and that, that goal inside of you. So do you remember how was that internal battle of okay, I'm not following this traditional path, I'm taking another route? How was that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think a lot about the quote that there's no comfort in growth and no growth in comfort, right? If you're comfortable, you're not growing, and to be uncomfortable is to grow. It's to be outside of your comfort zone, right? And luckily, I'm a product of a woman who broke a cycle, a very perpetual cycle of poverty. And this was my grandmother. I owe a lot to her. She was a woman who, was born in Kansas City on this was a long time ago, but on a dirt floor, and had a very difficult life. She was abused sexually. She was abused physically. She had multiple children by the time she was 18 with an alcoholic partner, and did as best as she could. But she decided, as she was growing, that this was not what she wanted for her children, right? And so she was able to break a cycle that was perpetual, right? They say hurt people, right? She was able to break a cycle through her own strength, right? And she gave a better life to my mom than she had, and then my mom gave a better life to me than I had. And this goes into the sort of philosophical reason why I do what I'm able to do, is because I was a person. It's not that we had a luxurious life or anything, but we didn't miss anything. We never went hungry, and I was very much loved. I didn't feel an absence of love or importance. And my mother instilled in me a lot of really great qualities, even as a person who had never gone to college or didn't know much of that pathway, but just how to be a good person, and how to pursue a dream, and how to work hard, and how to fall and get back up, and fall and get back up, and do that over and over and over again. So as a person who is loved, I feel like I have a duty to go out there and try to break cycles and try to expand that love as much as possible and help. I have a duty, and that's how I feel. I'm a white guy born in the United States. The truth is for me, thinking only about myself is not gonna bring me the happiness that I search for, right? I know that money is important. I'm after that as well, but I'm not trying to be the richest guy in the cemetery. My goal is to try to leave an impact on people's lives and have a story that people remember about me.
And you mentioned before we started recording that you're not that technical, but you are. It sounds like partially trying to solve that, breaking that cycle for people in the favela through technology. Could you speak to that? Why are you using that? I'm sure there's a million ways to approach it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the starting point for that is really taking a kind of a zoomed out perspective and understanding where we are in what period we are in the evolution of human history, right? So we're at a point now where we're kind of moving out of the industrial period and into more of an innovation economy driven by technology, right? The barriers to entry, cell phones, computers, all of those things have been lowered by the acceleration of technology, and also the access to information, right? And so we see this hyper acceleration of technology that's exponential and increasing ever so more, but we don't see that matched with people being propelled out of poverty. In fact, it's the inverse, right? We see more poverty, and we're seeing the slums grow, right? And so you have this unique window, I think, in human history where the biggest companies in the world, Google, Facebook, others are saying, tech companies are saying, look, we don't necessarily need you to have a college degree anymore. We just need you to have the skill set that we need because of how fast things are changing, right? And so, and not only that, but we need very creative, outside of the box thinkers who are not going to be on an assembly line putting the two arms on the doll over and over and over again. The tasks are more consequential, they're more creative, and you need a different sort of talent pool, right? For me, looking into these favelas and seeing the absence of 90-degree angles and that everything is kind of mishmashed together, but everything works, is evidence of creativity. It's evidence of resiliency. It's evidence of kind of the foundation that the sector needs, right? And so you've got this entire sector that's hungry for talent, right? The deficit of talent is huge and increasing ever so. And at the same time, you've got these communities that are growing and growing and growing. Latin America is the most urbanized region in the world. It's got 8 in 10 people that live in cities, and almost 1 in 4 of those live in an informal urban settlement. So you've got these real gold mines of human potential and talent and creative, resilient people. And so the idea is, how do we bridge that gap, right? How do we satisfy the needs of the market while propelling people out of poverty and transforming lives? Because when you give somebody a skill set that they're going to get 3-4x times the salary that they were earning in that community, you not only change that person's life, you change the trajectory of their life, their kids' life, their grandchildren's life, their great-grandchildren's life. I'm a product of that, right? Of somebody who broke a cycle and was able to go into a different direction. And so the impact there is huge. The potential there is huge, right? So how did that all come about in my life personally was I left Hosin, I left the favela about a year and a half after I had gotten there. I had intended on staying only for a couple of months and ended up staying for more than a year. I mean, I really, really fell in love with that community and was really embraced by it. And I started teaching English there and blah, 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 blah. But I thought to myself, look, if I really want to do this with my life, have an impact and do social impact, I need to think more strategically about this and how I leverage the gifts and the resources that I have personally. Being here, giving English classes is great, but it's not enough. You need to think more strategically about this. I remember teaching English to a guy there, and he spoke English perfectly, and said, Enrique was his name. What do you want to do now? You speak English well, you can get a good job. And he says, I want to be a bellhop at a hotel. And it was very clear that his purview was still very closed off. He wasn't dreaming big. He wasn't, and so it wasn't enough just to provide the skill set, right? So all of that to say that I left I left Brazil to come back to the United States to do a master's degree. Looking at the master's degree, I was appalled by the cost of an MBA. That's what I wanted to do. And in the deeper I got into it, it was, man, $120,000, $150,000 to do an MBA program. It doesn't sound like a good bet for me because I'm going to have to absorb a debt that I'll have to service, probably working a job that is not aligned with what I want to do and what my mission is. I was scared of the debt, I would say, in few words. And so I did my due diligence. I talked to friends. I talked to people who were doing the MBA programs or that had done them. And I said, look, was it worth it? What are your recommendations? I'm thinking about doing it. And the feedback was almost unanimous in that, look, the content was great, but it's really about the connections that you make while you're in those programs. And so I thought to myself, shoot, how can I put myself in the same environment to make those connections, to really get the meat and potatoes of that program, right? The real value of it, but not pay the ticket price to get in. I had to, and so I found a way to do that by enrolling myself in an academic program at Berkeley. And that program was Latin American Studies, and the reason why I did that program was because it gave me full autonomy to kind of create a program as long as it was involving Latin America. I knew that I wanted to do social impact. I knew I wanted to, at first I was thinking housing, but then I got more and more into what's called impact investing. And so that was very much aligned with my desire to generate a larger impact. I felt like if I could get my hands on investment capital, if I could get my hands on large sums of capital and direct that capital to communities or to organizations that were really generating an impact, then that was a good way for me to leverage kind of the gifts and the privilege that I had as a person with that perspective. And so I did that for about 5 years. I managed an impact investment portfolio for an organization in San Francisco, and managed the Latin American region. So I put about full cycle about $14 million into a variety of different organizations that were mission driven and focused on alleviating poverty, mostly low-income women who had started or were growing businesses in the Latin American region. So through that experience, I was able to see a variety of different business models and a variety of different legal structures, and just kind of got a smorgasbord of different social impact models. Shortly after that, I was recruited to lead operations, international operations for a startup at that time in San Francisco that was developing the first 3D printer for housing. And this was a mission-driven organization that was not going to sell this machine to the highest bidder, but instead bring this machine to places like Haiti, where people were still living in tents that had lost their homes in earthquakes, El Salvador, Mexico. So it was at the intersection of tech and social impact that I really had the light bulb go off and said, my experiences in the favelas in Brazil, the growing skills gap in the technology sector, and the ability and the sort of power to use technology to really accelerate social impact, specifically here in Latin America and in the favelas, is kind of how that all started.
Yeah, you touch on a very interesting subject when you're talking about like how resilient those people are, like when they're living in those poor communities. I feel like that's something that people don't necessarily pay attention to, and it's such a amazing skill and amazing strength if you're looking for someone to hire and someone to like join the workforce. That's unique, like people who are willing to stay 2 hours in a bus just to get to work and get back. But the biggest problem is that mentality, that just like the landscape that they have, they don't even realize the different options they have in front of them. And you obviously need to raise awareness, and I feel like that's pretty cool that we can raise awareness to tech, which is a place that we need more people. Every single company that you talk to is gonna say the same. Oh, hiring is super hard, we're struggling to retain talent, and so there's definitely a gap there. And I love how you visualize that gap. And instead of just like going with like a brute force solution to this problem, you're actually trying to think, okay, I need capital. And so let me learn how to generate capital. And once I understand that, then I can get those skills and apply to that social cause. So it's super interesting how you kind of like did some reverse engineering to figure out the solution to this problem, So
absolutely. And it was I always wanted to be very conscious and very sensitive before I ventured out and started my own organization, because one, you put everything, your heart and your soul into it, and your money, and that's a huge risk, right? But I think most importantly is that you're messing with people's lives, and you're messing with people's dreams and aspirations, and you're giving them something to hope for. So you need to be very sensitive about that. And I didn't want to venture off and do this until I had certain, a model that I believed in very much. So I spent a lot of time and a lot of years exploring different models. And I think the kind of bread and butter, or the differentiator for us as Plataforma Impact, is that there's this old adage of giving a person a fish or teaching the person to fish, right? As if teaching the person to fish is the solution. It's part of the solution, but it's not the entire solution. If I teach somebody to fish, but they don't know where fish are, or they don't know where to find the fish, that skill is used for nothing. And I saw that through that example of the boy that I taught English, right? So it's very, very important that we develop these professionals, that we teach them, that we give them a skill set. But at the same time, it's super important that we connect them with people from outside of the community, mentors that are actually working in the market, right? Mentors that are living in the United States but are of Brazilian origin, or who grew up in communities, so that they can see, so that they can dream bigger, and see examples and success cases that, wow, if that person did it, I can too, right? It's showing them where the fish are, and showing them that it's possible to do that. So, I would say that, boiling down to kind of the essence of what we do, it's the technical skills, right? It's teaching them programming, but it's also social support. You're dealing with people who sometimes have very difficult backgrounds, or who experience domestic violence, and so we have a psychologist that comes a couple of days a week. We also have people who live with very, very, very little income, and that cannot dedicate themselves 100% to study with us, and so we provide a scholarship program. Right? So we have the technical skill sets, the technical training. We have the social support. And then we have the mentorship. Right? And the mentorship is connecting them to those professionals that are actually working in the market. And what happens is that these professionals who come with a good desire to help, and are mission-driven, and enjoy doing this with their time because of the heart that they have, end up seeing the talent and the potential that exists in those communities, and say, shoot, can I recruit this guy for my team? Can I recruit this girl for my team? I've got 25 vacancies, and so that happens. But we're building bridges, and that's kind of the DNA of the organization, is to build a bridge, have a hand here and have a hand here. Is if you get out to the market, you have a responsibility to help the next one get there as well, and that's really much the spirit of the organization.
What have you seen as like the biggest hurdles? Because I would imagine even some of those things that we take for granted in the U.S., networking is hugely important for like getting a job, but like we already have Wi-Fi and probably multiple computing devices, and like just desks, and like just material things that we probably don't even realize that we have and can use for a career or for a first job or something. So I'm curious if it's like material things, or is it those like skill sets, or like what is the biggest hurdle for the people that you're with?
Good question, and I think the simplest answer to that is time, and that time means that we all only have 24 hours in a day, right? But if you're too worried about tomorrow or what you're going to eat tonight, independent of whether you have a computer or not, it's that's what's at the forefront of your mind. So, I'll give you an example. One of our very first students, we launched the organization. We did an announcement that this program was happening, and we had a student that was coming from another favela an hour away, right? And this student was riding the bus and coming to study with us, and we learned right away how much potential this kid had. He speaks English fluently, and I said, "How did you learn how to speak English like that?" And he said, "On Duolingo, an application on the phone."
Uh-huh.
And I said, what else do you know? He had this advanced knowledge of mathematics, right? And he had already kind of messed around with programming and stuff, and just a super, super talented kid, right? But he would miss class sometimes. And we said, what's going on? why are you missing class? And he says, I'm trying to get up earlier to go to work so that I can get off earlier to come and study with you guys. But, sometimes my boss doesn't let me leave. And I said, well, what are you doing for work? And he said, I'm an assistant for a mechanic at a mechanic shop in the favela that I live in. And I said, okay, how much money are you making there? And he said, it's about $150 a month. This is 6 days a week, 8 to 10 hours a day. And I said, no, you're going to be our very first scholarship recipient. We see how much potential you have, and we also see your ability to be a leader, because he would help other students. He had that advanced knowledge, but he was a natural leader. He naturally wanted to help others, and so he was what we call our first Jedi. Right, so we call these advanced students that are also embodying the values of our organization Jedis. Right, these are students that have that technical knowledge that can pass on to the student, but they're responsible for teams of between 5 and 10 students. And so as a student enters the program, they don't come in as a student and one professor. They come in as part of a team. So they learn those soft skills that they're going to need for the market kind of naturally or organically through the process, and those Jedis act as those team leads, which develop their own leadership skills as well. So anyway, to not divert too much from the story, we saw very much that if we wanted to have this kid, right, then we needed to free up his time. Right, his time was the thing that was restricting him, because he was living literally hand to mouth. Right, he couldn't survive. He couldn't come study with us if he didn't have some source of way to take care of himself. This kid. He comes from the northeast of Brazil, which is one of the poorest regions of the country, and he's been alone since he was 16 years old. He lost his father, and he doesn't have any contact with his mother. But this is a kid that's got all of the resiliency, like you mentioned, Zeno, and just like we say in Portuguese, the garra. You can't stop him. He's hungry for knowledge. Right. The thing that he lacked was direction. Right, and that's why he came to us. He was looking for direction. How do I turn this desire to better my life into something really tangible? And I think he saw a lot of promise in our organization in the same way that we saw a lot of promise in him. And he now is one of our most advanced students, and he's being mentored, one-on-one mentor with one of the biggest banks here in Brazil right now. So our hope is that within the next couple of months he's going to get recruited, and within a year he's gone from making $150 a month to hopefully making a lot more than that and having a different life.
That's amazing, man. That's so cool. Like, what are I'm so fascinated, because now this is the kind of transformation, like going back to like the first things you were saying, like how we can generate like generational transformation in people's lives. And I feel like that's the turning point that could be for him for the next 2 to 3 generations. What are the biggest challenges that you are seeing in terms of running that operation and generating more stories like his story?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest challenge for all startups is funding, and it's a lot easier to fundraise for something that's already happening than it is to fundraise just for an idea. Right. So not long ago, this was just all an idea. We're barely a year into this thing, but these stories are super powerful. We hear things all the time about, where do you want to be in a year from now? And the response is, honestly, I've never thought about that, because I'm always thinking about tomorrow. I've never stopped to think about next year, because I've always in survival mode. And so the biggest challenge is fundraising, definitely. I've done a friends and family round. I've put some of my own capital into this, but it's all a process of proving the model, right? So essentially, what we want to do, our longer term vision here, is not have to depend on donations, which is what we're dependent on right now, right? We receive donations through a 501c3 in the United States. We have our NGO set up here in Brazil as well. But the longer term vision is to, as we put these guys out into the market, is to be able to contract a few of them, contract a few of those engineers that we're developing, so that they can work on real projects that generate revenue for the organization, right? And even better, if we can take advantage of the exterior market, if we can take advantage of the U.S. and do outsourcing and offshoring, so that capital that's generated through those engineers that are working on real projects can then be reinvested into the ecosystem to help grow our impact and expand, right? And then replicate that model, which is self-sustainable, in other communities, in other cities, in other states, and eventually other countries. Have a self-sustaining model that transforms lives by way of technology, and also servicing the needs of the market. So that's a process, right? We're in the process of forming those first guys that are going out into the market, those first girls that are going out into market. And that's a process of capturing a few of them to start working on those real projects and generating revenue. Until we get to that point, we are in survival mode ourselves, having to depend on donations, having to depend on the grace of a company that wants to help us, that believes in our mission. But, it's still very much in its infancy. And so that's one of the biggest barriers is fundraising. The other thing that I would say is that's linked to the fundraising is, we don't have a full team of full-time staff members. Everything has been sort of ad hoc, and people have other jobs still. And so, if we were able to have at least one or two staff members full-time, things would accelerate quite a bit. But we're moving along as fast as we can, and there's no lack of heart or desire with any one of the team members or any one of the students that are involved. So independent of how long it takes, we'll get there.
I would imagine that it's like there's quite a bit of delay in like the iterations, because even, not that it takes 4 years to learn something, but even if you look at like a college education of 4 years, like you're starting a year ago, and I'm sure it's probably more concentrated. You're not trying to do like a whole general education or something like that. But, it takes even a year to do like the first round. So then it just like takes, you kind of have to be in it for the long haul to see that enough cycles go through that you can prove yourself, and then have, some of those people coming back and helping, and then being able to get more funding because they've seen like the third round of students go through and be successful. And it's not something that you can necessarily even prove just from like, hey, a couple months, like there's a lot of students in. That doesn't necessarily prove it, right? Like you need to see the full cycle go a couple times to really show the value, I would assume.
It's the quality over the quantity thing, right? We want to really make sure that these first students that are going through the program are holistically prepared to carry Plataforma, the reputation, into the market with a lot of strength, right? And we're very cognizant of that. And the other thing that we're cognizant of is the fact that you're dealing with people who have oftentimes a deficit of knowledge because of the lack of quality education that exists in these communities, right? So, where you would think that, you can start with basic arithmetic, or you can start with, programming logic, you've got to take, 3 or 4 steps back sometimes, because some people, they have such a deficit of knowledge in mathematics that it's that you really don't realize how far back you got to start to help get them. So, to help get them to that real starting point. So our hope and our vision is that as we prove this model with adults, right, we can take this farther down into secondary, into primary education, so that we don't have to deal with a deficit of mathematical knowledge once they get to a point where they can go through the program and enter into the job market. So I think it's important to mention too that part of my financial analysis training and all of that is market research, and so I've always been very interested in similar organizations, and I've done a lot of due diligence around similar organizations. And the model that I was really, really attracted to was one that exists in the Dominican Republic. And I brought my colleague from Brazil out there in January to visit them, and we saw what they had done with moving down the education chain with a model that they had created using technology. And so, we went out to a primary school and saw kids that were 6, 7 years old using Osmo, learning kind of the basic fundamentals around computer programming and mathematics. And then by the time they were in middle school, they had created a website for the town there that was drawing in tourism. And by the time they were 15, 16, wow, they were taking recyclables from the community, melting the plastic, making a string out of the plastic, and then putting that into a 3D printer to make things. And they made a prosthetic finger for one of the students that was there. It's super cool.
Wow.
But it was, it was a program that they had developed to satisfy the need in the Dominican Republic for tech talent that worked, and then they brought it farther and farther down. And so, it's like the every kid is a genius type of thing. Imagine if every kid that's a genius has access to these types of tools. Imagine what they'll create. I think the prosthetic finger is just the beginning of that. And especially with a community like a favela that experiences a myriad of social and environmental problems. My personal hope and desire is that these people who come from these communities, who confront these challenges every single day, who better knows the solutions for those problems than those people who are living them every day? What they lack access to is the tools and the resources to develop those solutions to those problems. So by way of our program, the hope is that you'll see kids that develop programs develop solutions for problems that exist there within those communities.
And that's so much better than someone from the outside coming in and bringing in like a new technology that needs to be maintained and everything, and then just like plopping it into a community, and then like it lasts for a year. Yeah, exactly. So that's so cool that you just give them the skills to actually be able to solve those problems that they're facing in their community and build a sustainable model around that. That's amazing.
Yeah, let's say that I'm someone who's listening to you right now, and I'm a designer, I'm a product manager, I'm a programmer, and I'm like, oh, this is interesting. I wonder if I can help this Gary guy. So, how can people reach out to you and just contact you, like get in touch with Plataforma? How does it work?
Yeah, so I would say there's kind of like three pillars, three different ways to help where we need a lot of support. Number one is kind of our mentorship program, right? Not that everybody can be or wants to be a personal mentor, but we do open up spaces for people to give talks, right? 30 minutes, an hour to talk about your experience as a person involved in the technology sector, right? You don't have to speak Portuguese. A lot of these students speak English, but to just hear from you is inspiring, and it gives them more visibility into the market and talking about your story, right? How you got there, right? Everybody's got such a unique path, right? And these students are on their own. So hearing from people who have made it or who are actually working in the tech sector is super helpful. So we have that mentorship program, whether you want to just share your story or whether you want to be a personal mentor for a student. The second is kind of just be an ambassador for us. If you're working for a large company, oftentimes they have programs within those companies, or they have donation matching programs. Be an ambassador for us. Help us spread the word. Follow us on social media. Communicate with your community of technologists that are interested in passing their knowledge on to the next one, or at least helping us grow this program. And the third and most important is donations. We have a link to on our website through plataformaimpact.org for donations. And remember also that the exchange rate really is in the dollar's favor, right? So $1 equals 5 Brazilian reais right now. So even a donation of $20 goes super far down here. Our scholarship recipients receive $200 a month, and that allows them to pay rent, to eat, to take care of themselves, and study full time. And so $200 a month doesn't seem like a lot, but it goes really, really far down here. And so, yeah, mentorship, be an ambassador for us, and any contribution that you can make, and even better if it's within your company that can do a donation matching program. All of that stuff is super, super helpful for us. And again, it's www.plataformaimpact.org. Plataforma is the Portuguese and Spanish word for platform, and then impact as in English. And that's how we are on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook as well. And the reason we're called Plataforma is because we very much believe in not handouts, but hand ups. Right? So if you can pull yourself up to the platform by your own desire and commitment, then we're here to help you. So it's partly you and partly us, but we're in that together.
Man, that's awesome.
Awesome.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing your story. We close every session out with the same question. I'm really curious what you will say, and in your context. And so, what is something on your desk? It could be like a software, it could be hardware that makes you enjoy coming back to your desk or your computer or workplace or anything like that.
Good question. So, I talked a lot about the head and the heart earlier, and having that clarity between the two, and allowing the heart to be the North Star. So, the amethyst, it's it's the stone that kind of represents the heart chakra, and that's always an important piece for me to maintain. As you navigate life and all of the challenges and the reasons why you want to quit, and this isn't working out, and I always go back to that, because that's why I'm here and that's why I'm doing this, right? So to never lose sight of the why, because there's going to be a lot of reasons that will make you want to stop or make you want to quit, but always remember the why you set out on this path, and I think that's kind of the lifeline that's carried me forward through this entire time.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the ByteTalk podcast. You can subscribe to be notified of our weekly episodes. And of course, if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, comment, and share with your friends. See you next week.